Before we get going, just to let you know that this session will be recorded. So if you don't want to be on video, then you can feel free to turn it off. So yeah, just to let you know. Right, well, hello and welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us for our first in our new series of Inclusive Recruiting Network events, Creating a Winning CV. I'll just, like I said, just let you know that we will be recording this video for marketing purposes and for a resource purpose to send out to our candidates. Before we get started, I'll just do a little intro into me. So those of you who don't know who I am Halima Latif, the Candidate Network Manager at Inclusive Recruiting. And if you're new to Inclusive Recruiting, well, we are an organization that work with progressive organizations that are actively trying to become inclusive in the workplace. We provide recruitment, training, and EDI consultancy services to our clients. I'd like to take a moment to just highlight the reason for why we are here. Well, Inclusive Recruiting recognize that the workplace, and in particular leadership teams, need more representation of diverse talent. Hence, we have created the Inclusive Recruiting Network to bring you events such as this one, resources and support to help you in your career. I'm really excited today because today we've got Mohammed Kasujee with us. He will be presenting the session. Mohammed is a career coach that is passionate about helping his clients find careers that they want. He also supports with CV writing and interviewing preparation. He helps people with at various stages of their career. And he also supports organizations with outplacement services and spends a significant amount of time mentoring young people. So thank you, Mohammed, for being here with us today. We appreciate it. And without wasting any more time, over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Halima, for the warm introduction. I'm really looking forward to this session today. Session, Create a Winning CV is what we're going to focus on. But before I really get into the meat and bones of it, if I could just request a few housekeeping tools. If you could kindly keep yourselves on mute for the duration of the session, that'd be much appreciated. Please feel free, as you've already done, to ask some questions and make comments on the session using the chat function as you're going along. We will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. So if you would like to ask any questions verbally, you're more than welcome to do that. But again, happy to keep note of questions as we're going. Please feel free to be as interactive as possible, and I will be available for any ongoing support afterwards if there are any points that need clarifying as well. So Halima gave me a very warm introduction, but just a bit more about me. I am very passionate about all things careers, and in my time I've helped over 1,000 clients realize and achieve their career goals. As well as being the managing director of MK Career Solutions, a career consulting and recruitment company, I'm also the founder of a non-for-profit social enterprise called Connect the Dots, which aims to empower individuals from a BAME background to enhance social mobility. And I also hold various board positions, most notably at Magical Mind CRC, an entity, a non-for-profit set up to help young people achieve confidence and enhanced mindset, as well as, of course, being a mentor for the Princess Trust and Future Frontiers in a pro bono capacity. So let me give you an overview of what this session will entail before we go into it. It'll be roughly a 35-minute presentation with a 15-minute question and answer session at the end. And there is a free one-to-one consultation available for every participant post-session. So please feel free to get in touch if any of this requires any further support. The agenda of the session will be as follows. We'll go through a CV checklist initially, the do's and don'ts of CVs, what to include and what not to include. We'll talk about how to structure a CV, how to demonstrate achievement, and how to arrange work history, probably the most pivotal and core components as a CV as a whole. But before we actually begin, it's really important to discuss what the CV purpose is. And the purpose is to give the employer an overview of how qualified you are and how you best fit the vacant role. It's not about telling your whole life story from the day you were born to present day on paper. It's about giving a snapshot and an overview which will facilitate further discussions, hopefully at an interview stage. And that's another point as well. The CV shouldn't only get you through the door to an interview, but a CV crafted in the correct way will also serve as a prompt for you as the candidate and for the hiring manager to ask questions. I've been fortunate enough to be on both sides of the spectrum, and as a hiring manager, quite often what happens is I'll skim a CV in the initial application stage, I'll put it in the yes pile or the no pile, and when I'm selecting candidates for the interview, about 15 minutes to half an hour before the interview, I might take some time to read the CV again in greater detail, perhaps make some notes about points I want to discuss, and then use that as a facilitator for the interview itself. Most hiring managers will work in a similar sort of way. So if you have a clear, concise, crafted CV, you can almost predict what kind of questions are going to be asked of you in the interview and prepare accordingly for that. And that in itself gives you a distinct advantage. Before you start, probably the most important thing, I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talks about begin with the end in mind. Before you start making a CV, think about a few different factors, most notably, what is the job that you're applying for? What are the requirements of that job and what are the demands and asks? Because the more tailored your CV is to the role, the more likely you are to have interview and consequently job success. So as mentioned, let's go through a bit of a checklist now. Some of the do's and don'ts, things to include on a CV itself. Number 1, spelling and grammar, without a doubt, is the most pivotal part of any CV. You only have one chance to make a first impression, and the thing that will come up the most spotted is spelling and grammar. I know what it's like writing CVs. I write CVs every single day, and when you look at the same document for hours and hours, days and days perhaps even, it's quite often to oversee and miss some of the mistakes. However, the irony of it is when someone new is looking at your CV for the first time, they will pick up on those mistakes straight away, and that will limit your success. ATS systems, applicant tracking systems, are more and more prevalent. Some of the more sophisticated systems also rank CVs based on quality. Spelling and grammar can stand out on those as well, and perhaps put you in a disadvantageous position. The next thing to consider is about dates, making sure that the dates are aligned, and of course, in reverse chronological order. It's quite easy sometimes to get the dates wrong, but the reason this is so important is that the dates specified on the CV, quite often before making a formal offer to you, a company may ask for references, and if the reference dates don't align with your CV dates, you may be in a position where that offer may be rescinded from you. So be very, very conscious about having the dates, and of course having them in reverse chronological order so that the employer can see what you've done most recently all the way back in time. A 2-page CV is ideal. I've done a lot of research into this. I've spoken to HR managers, I've spoken to recruiters, hiring managers. No one can give me a true definitive reason why a 2-page CV is the standard. But however, that is what it is. And quite often employers maybe don't have the time to read further than 2-page CV with a volume of applicants that come in, and you want something that's concise. Whether you've got an extensive history or not, having a 2-page parameters forces you to be as clear and specific as possible and trim any of the fat off the CV itself. An easy to read font, size 11 to 12 is ideal. We see all sorts of fonts when I read my CVs, all these fancy squiggly ones that look really nice on paper, perhaps don't read well on the computer. Stick to the ones that we know. I tend to use Calibri as my format of choice. It's nice, it doesn't look as rigid as Times New Roman, and very easy to read. 11 to 12 is best as well. You can adjust this based on how much space you need, but try not to go too small. Things might look really large on a computer screen, but when they're printed out, they can look really tiny. And the last thing you want is a hiring manager having to squint and read your CV. Make it as clear and easy to read as possible. Key competencies. We will go into this a bit later on, but making sure the key competencies and the work experience history is relevant to the job description. Make sure you read the job description and tailor it as much as possible. The key skills, the key words need to be tailored, and I will show you how to do this later. And making sure the desired job is clearly stated on the CV. You want your CV to appear tailored to the role. You don't want it to look like you're making blanket applications to hundreds and hundreds of different employees with the same CV. By clearly stating the job title, it shows a level of tailored bespokeness to it, and again, further enhances your chances of securing an interview. Now, very quickly, things you don't need to include for a UK-based CV. For many clients who may have been looking at overseas roles, who may have worked in the UAE or Europe, some of these things are required, but for the purposes of UK applications based on the Equality Act of 2010, you don't need to include a photo of yourself. You don't need to include date of birth. You don't need to include your gender, your nationality, status. All of these are protected characteristics, and it is actually illegal for employers to discriminate against you based on these, so there's no need to include them. A very common question is about hobbies and interests. Now, personally, for a graduate or for someone who has a role where there's very, very little to distinguish you from another, it is important to include hobbies and interests because that may be the only unique thing about you. But for individuals who are applying on the more experienced side of the spectrum, there really isn't a need to include hobbies and interests. Your values, the achievements, your accomplishments, things you've done to bring critical acclaim to the company, these are the things that should be at the forefront. Roy Disney, the brother of Walt Disney, has a very nice saying which talks about when the value is clear, decisions are easy. And that's the type of principle one should take on the CV. What you've done to bring tangible value to the companies that you've worked with should speak for themselves. And you shouldn't really need to worry about hobbies and interests, unless, of course, there is space permitting and you're within the 2-page format. Now, before we actually go into how to construct the CV and the various technical elements, this is the journey that a CV takes as it goes through the assessment process. Of course, number one, you submit a CV. Quite often it's submitted through an applicant tracking system or a job board, so on and so forth. Then it is reviewed by a non-technical stakeholder, i.e. a HR individual or a talent acquisition manager. And finally, it is reviewed by the hiring manager at the end. Now, why are these things important? It's important because a CV has to be designed to satisfy all three of these individual stakeholders. Number one, it has to have the right keywords, the presentation and the layout so that an applicant tracking system can correctly parse and view the information from it. Secondly, the information about your suitability for the job has to be very, very clear for a HR individual. Now, a HR individual is quite often very non-technical, so they don't really have any working appreciation of the role that you're applying for. So therefore, when they're looking at your CV, they're not looking at you from a technical perspective. Instead, what they're doing is they're reading the job brief and a person's specification that they themselves probably have crafted, and they want to see how many of the keywords, how many of the competencies align to that said specification. So making that clear for that individual is key. And then, of course, finally, it goes to the hiring manager. Now, the hiring manager is technical. The hiring manager often knows the role inside and out. Quite often, they've done it in the past. And to make sure that it satisfies them, having achievements, making sure that what you've done in your previous roles and how well that aligns to the role you're applying for is exceptionally important to articulate. There's loads of different formats that you can use for a CV, but for the purposes of today, I'll give you a very clear, distinct layout that you can use. As well as having your personal details at the top of the CV, it's important to include an executive summary, almost like a career overview, a paragraph at the top of the CV. This can be followed by what's called a key competencies section, some of your key characteristics which align to the job specification. That is followed by your career history, which should include a mixture of key achievements and the key responsibilities. And finally, your education comes towards the bottom with the qualification, year and date. So let's talk about your CV when it gets passed through the first phase of the process, which is the ATS systems or the job boards. These are some of the things to include on there to make sure you satisfy the relevant stakeholders. This sounds really obvious, but you'll be surprised at how often this can be missed. Stating your name, state your address, city and postcode is what you need. You don't need to include your door number or your street name. That's not necessarily relevant. City and postcode is exceptionally important to include so that they can get an idea of where you live. Making sure you have key competencies relevant to the job description so that the keywords are aligned. And making sure you have the desired job title clearly stated on the CV itself. Again, for keyword alignment, so that if recruiters are using job boards to search for your CVs using their various Boolean searches, it's very clear and easy for them to find you. The next stage of the process is that it passes to the non-technical stakeholder, i.e. the HR or talent acquisition individual within the company. Think about how well does your CV align to the job brief? How many of the responsibilities on the job brief have you put on your CV in previous roles? How many of the desired characteristics have you stated in your personal profile or in the key competencies section? Making sure as well that your email address and LinkedIn URL is hyperlinked as well. Why is this important? I've had clients come to me telling stories of how they've submitted a CV for a job. They haven't heard anything back, so they chased their respective recruiter or HR. And sometimes they've had feedback where, oh, we sent you an email, but we didn't receive any response, so we took someone else to the interview stage. It turns out that the individual within the company had typed in their email address wrong and thus got to the wrong address, and therefore they didn't even know. If you have a hyperlinked email address, one click from your CV in both PDF or Word forms can immediately take them to a message where they can send you an invitation for an interview, and it makes it easier. Hyperlinked LinkedIn is also exceptionally important. ATS systems sometimes have a button where if it recognizes your LinkedIn, a recruiter or HR can click on your LinkedIn profile. The point of these is to make the barrier of entry and accessibility to you as a candidate as easy as possible. Don't leave anything to chance. And this is probably one of the most important parts of it all. An average employer spends about 6 seconds looking at a CV. I have had this information validated from hiring managers that I've worked with. And again, make sure that the first impressions count for a lot. So this is the chance for you to get involved now. The next thing that I'm going to do is put a CV on the screen. And what I want you to do, feel free to type in the chat, is give me your thoughts and comments on what you think about the CV. Let me know what you think. Serena says there's a lot of words. I agree. Amelia is talking about how it's quite cramped. Again, I'd have to agree with that. Andrea mentions that's well descriptive but very cluttered. Have to agree there. No surname. Well spotted there, Cynthia. I like that. This is great observations, guys. Keep them coming. Priscilla talks about how it's not easy to read and no location. Again, excellent. Wow. Everyone's been paying attention to the top tips, really, because all of them have been pointed out. Excellent. Any more, guys? I think we've covered most of them. A couple of other things that I've noticed as well. There's a lot of core competencies written on the CV, but they're not really explained. There's no evidence. So if the client was asked about them in an interview setting, he may struggle to explain them in any greater detail. Another element is it's very difficult to see if there's any key achievements without actually reading forward. Another key point there. Yolaine has mentioned that there's no dates in the education. Again, excellent. Keshi has just picked up on the point I was making about not what they have achieved. Absolutely valid point there. Excellent. No dates in the technical skills either. A lot of wonderful, wonderful observations there. Now let's look at a different CV. I'm going to put this one on the screen. And again, let me know your thoughts on this particular CV. Laura says it's more of a story. I agree, certainly. Definitely tells more of a story. No city in work history. Interesting one, Yolaine, which we'll come on to certainly. Andrea talks about states key skills first before career overview. It's laid out well. Better than the last one, but still has a lot of words. Amelia says. There's a few questions here, so I'll address these as we're going along. Cynthia says, does different fonts on his name and skills make it off-putting? I would say no. In fact, I would say the opposite. It actually makes the name more memorable. Obviously, I've used a generic name here, which probably doesn't do that too much justice, but of course, for a real-life candidate, that may well be the case. Yolaine mentioned no dates again in education and certifications. Very good point there. I will address that. Any more, guys? These are great comments that we've mentioned here. Says Q1 for present job, not precise on dates. That might just be because it's quite small. It actually says 01, indicating January. That may just well be the small font. Has he gone too far back in regards to previous employment? Excellent points there, excellent points. Let's review some of these as we're going along, because some of these there's clear, distinct answers. Others, there's a lot more room for interpretation. So I've gone to a point that Yolaine made about no city in work history. This is actually a very deliberate one. So I'll give a bit of context. This is actually a CV that I wrote for a client not so long ago. Now, cities aren't included, in my opinion, for the work history to avoid any discrimination associated with certain areas, particularly with clients who have worked overseas. If we're dealing with clients for overseas, sometimes jobs from overseas countries may be seen as less favorable to another one. Now, of course, when those can be explained in an interview setting, I'm sure that would have no problem. But for the purpose of a CV where this may be held back, we don't want any barriers to entry. So therefore, I keep it as a standard rule of thumb not to include any cities or locations in terms of work history. Another point was made out about there's no dates on the education. Again, a very, very valid point. Now, the reason in this particular instance why this was not done for this particular client was that because the Bachelor of Business Administration and High National Diploma were actually done quite a long time ago, I believe in the late 80s or early 90s. Now, again, to avoid any discrimination, even though technically it's illegal, people do discriminate. Removing the dates from those just minimizes any risk of them being neglected and being perceived as too old for any reason. Serena asked a question about have they gone too far back in history? Now, my point is the 10-year history is the one where we need the greatest emphasis. However, if we do have room to play with within a CV and we've been concise, there's no problem in adding a greater amount of history on there, as long as we don't proceed the 2-page rule. Now, this CV fits comfortably onto 2 pages, as we can see, so there'd be no reason for us to validate that, and instead it would just leave some white space. Absolutely fantastic points there, guys. Really, really appreciate them. This is just to see a contrast between a CV that maybe isn't written so well to something which has a bit more conciseness and better written. So let's go on to the technicalities of this a bit more now. The first thing that we will focus on is the executive summary, that first paragraph we see on the top of a CV. Now, I like to use the analogy of a book. Imagine you go into a library or a bookstore and you pick up a book for the first time. It's very unlikely that you will start reading the book immediately. Instead, what you will do is flip the book around and read the blurb. And if the blurb reads well, you'll probably read the book. If it doesn't read so well, you'll probably discard the book. Now, the executive summary works in a similar sort of way. It almost acts as a very immediate summary of who you are as a person. It's often the very first thing that hiring managers look for and read, and sometimes even the only part that they look at as a whole. Write 3 to 4 sentences where you highlight your most relevant strengths, skills, experience level, and previous titles. Leave that first impression, make it memorable, make it impactful, make it sound unique, and you stand yourself in good stead a chance of the employer reading the rest of your CV and consequently taking you to an interview. Now, this is a question for you guys again. Should the executive summary, the personal profile, be written in first person or third person? What are your thoughts? Type your answer in the chat. I'm very, very curious to hear what you guys have to think. Serena says first person. Interesting. Priscilla says neither. That's very interesting. Caroline has mentioned third person. Amelia has said third person. So we've got a bit of a 50-50 split here. Cynthia's not sure, but says first person. Andrea says first person. So we've got more of an inclination towards first person here. Now, the correct answer to this is that there is no correct answer. It's purely up to opinion. First person and third person is purely objective. In my CVs that I've written, I've used a mixture of first and third, but generally speaking, my inclination and my bias is towards the first person. Now, the reason for that is that paragraph can potentially be the only personal part of the CV itself. The rest of the CV, the achievements, the work history is written quite objectively. So this is the chance for one to build a connection, build a rapport with the person reading the CV, because inevitably any hiring manager will tell you, before they've even met you as a candidate, they'll start to build up a picture of you just from reading the CV. You're more likely to build a more positive personal image using first person on the personal profile than a third person image, and thus bettering your chances of having some sort of connection. But again, there's no conclusive answer. This one is purely up to opinion. It's very interesting to see that the majority of the chat focused on first. I've tended to use both in the past, but first is my preference. So let's see an example of an executive summary. This is one written for a HR manager, a client that I worked with very recently. I'm a self-motivated and adaptable HR manager with over 12 years of experience within healthcare, telecommunications, and retail. I pride myself on being an organized planner with excellent team leadership and program management abilities. My strengths include a people-focused approach to working with a strong degree of empathy coupled with a vibrant nature to develop strong business relationships to facilitate organizational goals and objectives. Following the recent completion of my master's in HR management, I'm actively seeking new opportunities as a HR business partner. So, this is an example of an executive summary. Now, that may seem a bit abstract as to how that is written, but it's actually written in quite a formulaic and modular way, which you can use for your own respective CVs too. And I'm going to show you the formula for writing a summary very shortly. Choose 2 power adjectives to describe yourself. You're ambitious, motivated, creative, enthusiastic, driven, solution-focused, people-orientated. Find 2 power adjectives that best describe yourself. You can also state how many years of experience you have, with over 20 years of experience, within which roles, as a CEO, as a HR business partner, as a sales manager. Mention significant companies that you've worked for in the past. Again, exceptionally important. You can talk about your strengths, you can talk about your passions, what skills have enabled you to achieve career success, and then finally explicitly state the job role that you're applying for. You can take any one of these points or a few of them to incorporate into an executive summary. So let's see that in practice. This is one for a commercial director CV I worked for recently. These are the 2 power objectives. I'm an ambitious and self-motivated commercial director, so we know what role this guy does. How many years of experience you have is clearly stated in that first line, 17 years of experience. What industry he's worked in is project management within healthcare. Strengths and characteristics are stated there, using words like find innovative solutions to complex business problems, highly organized nature, keen eye for detail, all talking about strengths in a way that sounds engaging. And most importantly, stating the desired job title at the bottom there. This shows and indicates that the CV is tailored towards a particular role. If he was applying for a VP of sales role, he'd write that. If he was applying for a commercial director role, he would write writing for a commercial director. The point is that it's tailored towards the role that he's applying for. These are some of the words that you can use. I've mentioned a few of these already, but there's tons and tons of them. These are some of the examples of words you can use as power objectives to highlight your character traits. Now let's move on to the second point I talked about, utilizing the job description as a focal point for key competencies. So this is an example of a real job description I actually pulled off Google Jobs a couple of days ago. This is a job for Squarespace, you've probably heard of. Now, most job descriptions are written in the same way. They have an about the company section, a bit of an overview. They then have an overview of the role in very high level detail. Then they talk about what you will be doing in the role on a day-to-day basis, the roles and responsibilities. And finally, there's the person specification, arguably the most important part. These are the characteristic traits and qualifications that they're looking for in a relevant candidate. Now, the job description, guys, is giving you all of the answers that you need for your CV. You can very easily tailor your CV utilizing the job description, and I'm going to show you how. So let's start about the job description into the key competencies or the key skills section. This is the same job description. I've just cropped it so you can see this key competencies required. Talking about 6+ years of sales experience, 2+ years of experience in people management, proven track record as an individual contributor, expertise in around sales metrics, mentoring, coaching and onboarding, partnering with cross-functional teams, rapidly hire and train new account executives. These are the things that they're looking for in your CV. So if you're applying for this position, you want to see these things in your CV for you to progress. And these are points that I've written to almost tailor the CV to them. So the first point is about 6+ years of sales experience with documented sales success and track record. I've written proven track record of exceeding sales targets as an individual contributor across multiple roles. The second point is about having 2+ years of experience in people management. So I've written 5+ years of experience in effectively managing, coaching, and guiding high-performing sales teams. The next point I've focused on is the ability around sales metrics. So I've written target-driven, highly attentive to KPIs with a data-driven approach to decision-making. Do you start to see how these things are tailored to the role? You can easily take the job description, you can easily take the competencies they ask and shape them and make them applicable to you as a person. And the more you do that, the more likely you are to have visibility to these computer systems and job boards, and the more likely you are to be selected by these non-technical and technical stakeholders to be taken to the interview. Let's try again now, but with a work history instead. This is the same job description, and these are some of the points about work history. You will create a team culture of trust, accountability, success, and fun. Support direct reports by participating in client and prospect meetings. Mentor and develop a team of senior salespeople, including hiring and training new account executives. Refine the outbound sales strategy. These are all things that you'll be doing on a day-to-day basis. So how can we translate this into our work history? So of course, this is contingent on you having done some of these things in your job before. And if you have done, you can write points like the following. Supported sales meetings with challenging clients and facilitated business development. That is aligned to bullet point number 2 of the responsibilities. Analyze sales metrics and refined outbound sales strategies and processes to improve close rates. That is related to bullet point number 4 on the work history. And finally, we've got coordinated weekly pipeline review meetings with sales staff to collaboratively discuss best practice. That would be related to the second to last penultimate bullet point on the list. So as you can see, you can shape points from the job spec and utilize it to tailor in and bespokeness to your own CV itself. The last section I'm going to focus on very, very quickly is about key achievements, because this is arguably the most important part of the CV. It's not important in experienced positions about how many years of experience you have. What's more important, however, is the tangible value that you've brought to the organizations that you've worked with across your career history. Focus on evidenceable achievements, exceptionally important there. Use metrics as much as possible. How much money did you directly generate for the business, or the work that you did, how much money did it save? Are there any percentage increases with efficiency, with hiring rates, with retention rates, with job satisfaction, people impacted that you can use? The more numbers you have and the more stats, the easier and more credibility it has. Focus on how you added value. Take credit for the achievement. They don't care if you played a supporting role and someone else achieved it. They care about what you did. Take credit for what you've done within reason. Of course, don't lie about anything, but use to lies the truth as best you can to further illustrate your value and credibility. Types of achievements you can include. Commercial achievements, we've talked about this. Deals closed, achievements against sales targets, percentage savings generated. Awards. Did you win any internal awards? Employee of the month, employee of the year. Did you win any external awards? Did you help the company win any external awards or industry accreditations? Also, you can talk about process and system efficiencies. Did you help to reduce downtime, improve customer satisfaction, increase productivity? Achievements can take shape in a variety of different forms, and try and use the ones that best suit and fit you. These are some examples of achievements. This is for an operations manager. Some of the achievements are succeeded in reversing revenue attrition from incorrect timesheet submissions, recovering an additional 25% in revenue per month, developed and rolled out new automated onboarding systems and procedures which positively impacted new starter hiring and onboarding, leading to critical acclaim within the company, increased company work satisfaction scores by enhancing and adapting internal communications to the working from home format, and introduced new processes and policies in areas including HR and cybersecurity to fulfill regulatory and compliance requirements. Again, these are all tangible. They'd be very easy to prove if they were requested, and more importantly, each show value in a different way. They're not all repetitive, showing the same skill set, they're showing different skill sets used. So again, really think about how you can utilize achievements to the best that you can. Now, in a nutshell, we've gone on a bit of a whirlwind tour about CVs, but in a summary, this is what we've discussed today. Executive summary, you only have one chance to make a first impression. Make that one count. For key competencies and work experience, please do tailor the CV and the competencies and work experience to the job description for the role that you're applying. And finally, key achievements. Use evidence-based achievements consistently for each role. The more you can prove, the more credibility you have as a whole. Thank you very much for your time, guys. If you need any further support with anything discussed in this presentation, please feel free to get in touch. I'm more than happy to offer a complimentary free CV review for anyone who's interested. Please get in touch with me or send your CV directly to the email address below, and I'll be more than happy to review your CV for you and give you some feedback in depth. Thank you very much now, and I'll now pass back over to Halima, who will be able to curate the question and answer session.
Hi there, everybody. If you've got any questions. So we've had some questions about the length, how long the CV should be, and also sort of how many bullet points you should have underneath each job.
In terms of the length of the CV, I would recommend having a maximum of 2 pages. If you've got 2 pages to use, you might as well use it, but no more than that. I don't think there's any need to include any more. If there's a dying need to include more information, what you can do is take any supplementary information, put it into a covering letter, or what's called a supplementary document, an additional document which you can hand out in an interview, and that will allow them to give more information if it can't fit onto a page. In terms of bullet points, I would aim for a minimum of 1 achievement per role, but ideally the sweet spot is about 3. Number 3 resonates best mentally with people and leaves the best impact. In terms of responsibilities, maybe between 4 to 6 bullet points per role is probably the ideal amount that you'd want to talk about your responsibilities.
And we've got another question here from Caroline, and she says, what would the advice be for a candidate who has remained with one employer for more than 15 years, and therefore their work history of say 10 years would only demonstrate promotions? Let's just scroll down to what she's saying. Bear with me. The work history could be lengthy.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So if we take that first point about remaining in one job, but various different promotions, almost list each one of those as a separate job. So for example, if you started as a sales associate, then you became a territory manager, then you became a regional manager, list all of them as separate roles and entities itself. Of course, that work history can become quite lengthy, but then limit your bullet points. If worse comes to worse, and by doing that, you can't illustrate the rest of your work history, remove some of the responsibilities and just focus on achievements. That way, you're focusing on the tangible top line value first, and any supplementary information can come later.
Right. We have another question here from Sophia, and she's asking, how do I best explain job gaps on my CV?
Excellent, excellent. Now, that would depend on why the job gaps were. In a nutshell, most of my clients, the most common job gaps are for due to some sort of parenting leave or grievance. So what you can do is on your CV, don't write it as a footnote, actually write it as a job. So for example, if between January the 1st, 2017 to January the 1st, 2018, you had to take a leave because of grievance, you can just write that as sabbatical and then write a bullet point talking about grievance. Other ones that I've seen are where clients who have taken a break due to maternity have wrote a role and made it look like they've called it the domestic sphere. So reserving time, taking time out of work to dedicate time to looking after a young family, writing that almost as a job itself and writing some of the key skills and transferable skills. But the most important is be upfront about it all. Don't try and hide it and skip different dates to try and work around those gaps. List it clearly as a job. This is the time where I had a gap. This is why. If you need to elaborate on that because it's a more sensitive issue, you can use a covering letter to do that as well.
Great, thank you. And so I've had a couple of other questions. So one to do with education. So should one put the education at the top of the CV or keep it at the bottom where before or after the work history?
I would say the most important thing that an employer considers is your work history above anything else. So the education I would probably put towards the bottom of the CV rather than the top.
Great. And Cynthia asks, how many years of job history is ideal on the CV?
The sweet spot is about 10 years.
Okay.
But as I mentioned previously as well, if you've disclosed your 10-year history and there's still space, then feel free to go back further. At the very maximum, I would never go above maybe 15 to 20 years worth, because then you may be subject to age discrimination. We wouldn't want that. So ideal sweet spot is 10. If you really have to go up to about 15, I would say, but no more than that.
Sure. And Priscilla asked, is it necessary to add, normally some people at the end of their CV say references available upon request. Should you have that line in there?
No, there's no need to include that. The way the recruitment system works, if you're selected as a candidate who they're interested in, before making an offer, they're going to ask you for references anyway. No employer has the time to research references prior to that stage because they don't even know if you're a good enough candidate yet. So you don't need to include that. In my opinion, it's a waste of space on the CV.
Sure. And what are your views on hobbies and interests? A lot of people do add that in, regardless of sort of levels, or maybe that might, have an effect on your view. But hobbies and interests, should you add hobbies and interests to your CV?
If you have nothing else to distinguish you and make you unique based on your job history and your personal profile or your education, then it may be useful to include. However, for many of the clients and candidates on this call today, you'll probably have at least a few years of experience under your belt. You should be able to distinguish yourself in terms of what you've done in a role and use that to make you stand out from the crowd. But again, similarly, if you only have a few years of history in this space, feel free to include it, but don't make that the focal point of your CV. The focus should be achievements of what you've done in your previous roles.
Right. We've got a really great question here. I have dyslexia and sometimes miss grammar and spelling errors. Is there a way I can counteract that? If this is so, is there a way I can counteract that if this is so important?
Absolutely. I think the best advice I can give is hire a CV writer. I know a very good one. I'm joking. I've dealt with many dyslexic clients before. They are tools that you can use. The most common one is Grammarly. It's not perfect, but it does help. There are a few other ones as well, whose names elude me, but there are tools that you can use which do help. I think there are some very dyslexia-specific ones as well, actually. But I appreciate it can be tricky as well. It's always useful perhaps to get a second opinion from individuals as well. I know we're talking to a recruiter here. Halima's in the industry. Many recruiters are very happy to review and give feedback on CVs as well if you ask them. So if you have any concerns about the spelling or grammar, feel free to pass it on to an individual, and they'll be more than happy to help you.
Sure. And if you need any more further support on sort of specific tools, then obviously we can get that together for you and email you directly as well, can't we, Mohammed?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? I mean, it's been lovely to have you all here. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm hoping that you've all found it very informative and useful. It'll be lovely to hear from you and see, I mean, what do you take away from this session? It would be good to know what you'll take away from the session. Thank you, thank you, Amelia. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everybody. All right, I think that's a wrap. Well, thank you very much once again, and feel free, you've all got my email address because I have emailed you also. If you've got any questions or you need any particular support, feel free to email me at halima@inclusiverecruiting.co.uk, and you can get in touch with Mohammed if you would like a free one-to-one consultation on your CV as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.